We are back with the next chunk of the story, and this time we'll be covering the entirety of the Dark Tournament. For the anime, this covers episodes 26 through 66, and for the manga, we'll be picking up with chapters 52 through 112. That takes us all the way to volume 13. With so much to cover this time, I want to go ahead and say that we all know how much additional dialogue is added to the anime to pad out the pacing for television, so I'm going to try to stick to important and interesting differences, as well as noting the absences of scenes or characters. Otherwise, there's a ton of random additions that I'd have to write down that don't really make sense to go out of my way to point out, so if I don't mention something, I apologize in advance. I also want to apologize for the slowdown in content. Things have been very crazy on my end, and I kind of ended up with content paralysis. So I took a little time to step back and get refreshed so we can continue. I've got several projects cooking right now, and while I don't want to and can't commit to a specific timeline, I will say you shouldn't be waiting long. Except for the video essay. That one's probably going to end up being the longest video to date. Also, make sure you stick around to the end for a fun treat. I asked members of the community to color in this manga page, with the only stipulation being that they could only use the wrong colors for characters. I was curious to see what kind of interesting color palettes folks would come up with. I think I'll do this again with a manga page from the chapter Black arc, so be on the lookout for that in a community post or announcement in the Discord server. Before we continue on with our comparison, a huge shout out to these wonderful people for their continued support over on Patreon. With a special shout out to Celestial tier backers Angus Clydesdale, Super Sunset, This One Sneck, Totally Reasonable Curb, and Trey Hardy. If you'd like to see videos early, see your name in, or select a portrait for the credit scroll, consider heading to the link in the description and pinned comment to show some support. Make sure to like the video if you enjoy content like this, and don't forget to subscribe while you're here. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices small channels like mine. Alright, there's no reason to delay anymore, so let's go ahead and dive back into volume 6 of the manga. In the manga, Toguro refers to Yukina as merchandise Terukune stole from Sakio. In the anime, when confronted about not telling Yukina about their relation, Hiei poses the question if Yusuke thinks she'd be happy knowing her brother was a criminal. In the manga, he simply believes there was no point. Botan makes it clear in the manga that there was a lot of debate about allowing Hiei to deliver the videotape to Yusuke, and that it was a pretty obvious mistake on their part since he ended up watching it. In the anime though, Botan says they purposely sent the tape with Hiei to keep him distracted, and Botan says he didn't watch the tape. In the manga, when Yusuke leaves school after the case with Yukina closes, he finds Toguro waiting for him at the school's entrance. In the anime, he's out shopping with Keiko when he notices a building has been damaged, gets a bad feeling, and is subsequently confronted by Toguro. The extra scenes with Koenma and Spirit World are absent from the manga, including their discovery that the Toguro brothers are still alive. The manga begins this arc with that revelation completely independent of Koenma's observation. Kuwabara sees Yusuke walk off with Toguro in the anime, but isn't present at all for this confrontation in the manga. Unlike the anime, Toguro doesn't actually destroy the building they're chatting in. He simply gets right to the invitation to the Dark Tournament. Toguro also doesn't mention the collateral casualties of a refusal and simply says he'll kill Yusuke right then. Kuwabara doesn't appear in this chapter of the manga at all, so it's not made immediately clear if he understands the situation they're now in. When Toguro takes a jab at Hiei and Kurama for siding with humans, Kurama doesn't have a reply the way he does in the anime. There's no montage of Yusuke and Kuwabara doing their respective training for the tournament, but Kuwabara does allude to the training Kurama put him through. Kuwabara's motivation here seems to lie with the intention of protecting Yukina from subjugation, and not the imminent threat of death or the desire to get super famous so that he and Yukina can be together, as are his motivations in the anime. The manga gives us a clearer explanation of the idea of the quote-unquote guest teams by saying they consist of humans who have stuck their noses in underworld affairs. The anime has a scene where Koenma tells George that he also has no idea who the masked fighter is. During the assault on Team Urameshi aboard the ship to the island, Kuwabara whips out double spirit swords to defend himself. The ship captain shows his interest in Team Urameshi, wanting to see what they're capable of, but realizing they are barely putting in any effort to stomp out the demons on board. In the anime, he seems genuinely annoyed that they weren't killed. The anime has a scene with Sakio and Toguro discussing Team Urameshi's victory on the boat, and revealing that Sakio arranged for Yusuke's crew to face off against Team Rokuyukai in the first round. After this, the manga tells us that Keiko basically bullied Botan into bringing her to the tournament following the events of Mei's Castle. Atsuko is present in this version alongside Keiko and Shizuru. In the anime, Keiko and Shizuru team up to corner Botan into telling them where Yusuke and Kuwabara are while Atsuko is passed out. When Rinku makes his presence known, he mentions it was the captain of the previous winning team that nominated them as guests, but goes on to say he thinks he could take them all on himself. In the anime, he simply says that someone said they were special, but that they didn't look special. When Zero makes his presence known in the manga, Hiei is shown to be surprised that he'd slipped past too. The anime doesn't focus on any particular response from anyone. There's a panel that explains why the demons in the audience are so well behaved, and it's that those who committed bad deeds during the lead up to the tournament wouldn't be allowed into the stadium to watch, which is kinda funny to me. Koenma showing up at the tournament marks his first appearance in this arc, unlike his ubiquitous anime counterpart. In the anime, he shows up in his toddler form and then changes into his secondary form to avoid being made fun of. George also isn't present in the manga. We spend a bit of extra time in the VIP box where the owner of Team Rikuyukai gives the audience a taste of how smug the Black Club really is. This interaction is much shorter in the manga. After Zero flexes his energy to try to provoke the sleeping Yusuke, in the manga Kurama ponders the oddity of Zero hanging out in the human world, but in the anime, Kurama only mentions that someone of his class with the power of fire is interesting. In the anime, the fight between Kuwabara and Rinku has more push and pull, with Rinku seeming to have the upper hand until Kuwabara gets a clean hit. In the manga, Rinku doesn't actually attack Kuwabara at all until after he's been struck, and even then, until he attempts to break Kuwabara's neck, the battle is pretty one-sided in Kuwabara's favor. Kuwabara takes his time fighting Rinku and Kurama vouches for Kuwabara's love of fighting, but the anime only shows Hiei's annoyance that Kuwabara is allowing the match to go on longer than necessary. The second half of the battle is far shorter in the manga since the anime adds to the excitement, so moments like Kuwabara raising the tiles of the arena to block Rinku's yo-yos are anime exclusive. The ladies don't even show up to the fight until Kuwabara is already being suspended in the air. In the anime, they're there for most of the fight itself. On top of that, Koenma stays seated with them, he doesn't move to a private booth. It's Atsuko that gets in an argument with a demon before Shizuru's cigarette comes to the rescue in the manga, which happens right when they arrive, and in the anime it's Keiko that's confronted by a demon after shouting for Yusuke to wake up after Rinku lifts Kuwabara into the air. So something that's completely absent from the manga is Yusuke talking in his sleep, which does slightly change the way this fight wraps up. In the anime, after Kuwabara is knocked out of the ring, Yusuke's sleep talking provokes him into getting up, but then he wastes time outside the arena yelling at the sleeping boy. It's only when Kodo reaches 8 in the count that Rinku uses his yo-yos to prevent Kuwabara from getting back into the ring in time. In the manga, the moment Kuwabara gets up, Rinku uses the yo-yos to restrain him. No sleep talking, no time wasting, just an immediate response. While Kurama is dodging Roto's attacks and making him look silly, the anime pops back into the VIP booth where we see the owner of Team Rikuyukai is less than happy and Sakio takes a moment to dunk on him. Botan also doesn't join Team Urameshi ringside in the manga. When Roto pulls out the button in the anime, Rinku shows disapproval for it, but Zero argues that it gets results. This is absent from the manga, but is interesting characterization for Rinku. At the conclusion of the match with Roto, in the manga, Kurama admits that he enjoys facing demons like Roto because it allows him to be as brutal as he wants, and causes the death plant to grow by saying the trigger word, die. In the anime, he doesn't mention his own brutality, nor does he say the death plant has a trigger word, mentioning only that he needs to simply will it into growing. Roto asks him if he believes in mercy, to which Kurama says no, and that's when the plant kills Roto. Once it's time for Zero to fight, in the manga Kuwabara's confusion for the man fighting so soon is explained away by Hiei, who says they likely drew lots to determine their fighting order. In the anime, Hiei says Zero is likely fighting angry, suggesting it isn't actually his turn to fight. While the manga gets right to Zero impaling Hiei with his fist, the anime starts the battle with some ranged combat from Zero. Zero absorbing his own flames and turning red from the heat is also an anime-only thing. When Hiei goes to attempt the Darkness Flame, in the manga, Kurama mentions that it's a martial art forbidden in the human world and only meant for the demon plane. Both he and Hiei refer to it as the Blazing Fist of the Overlord, but it also has its own attack name, so I can only assume the Blazing Fist of the Overlord is kind of like the style or school of martial arts, and the Darkness Flame itself is a technique within that school or style. The Darkness Flame, at least in this translation of the manga, is called Black Dragon Hellfire. Naturally, there's much more spectacle to Hiei firing the Darkness Flame in the anime. After seeing the charred remains of Zero, Imogene and Gao both turn tail to bail on the tournament. In the anime, they're killed off-screen by Chu in the tunnel leading out of the arena. In the manga, we're shown that Chu decapitates them before they can even leave Rinku behind. Rinku is excited to see Chu in the manga, but he seems more reluctant in the anime. The anime puts Team Urameshi in a predicament where they're trying to determine who should fight Chu, only to realize Yusuke is gone, having woken up and entered the ring. In the manga, Kuwabara and Kurama both see Yusuke wake up before he makes his way into the ring. The moment of Chu going into the crowd to confront whomever called him a pathetic drunk is anime only, but it is still funny. There's way more of a back and forth between Yusuke and Chu in the anime, with Yusuke even managing to land a clean hit on his opponent. Whereas in the manga, after dodging Yusuke's assault, Chu immediately knocks him out of the ring with a kick. Fast forwarding a little bit, the anime has a flashback to when Rinku met Chu that is completely absent from the manga. In the manga, Chu is referred to as an aura alchemist, which Hiei states explains why he's able to consciously combine the alcohol in his system with his energy. The anime suggests there's alcohol in his energy just because of his insane drinking habits. Eventually, we arrive at the iconic knife knife-edge deathmatch. And surprisingly, in the manga, Kodo doesn't resist the suggestion and they don't wait on the tournament committee to make the decision to allow it, they just do it. The anime has a scene in the VIP booth where Sakio asks about the rest of Team Toguro before setting off to have the committee act in his favor. We also get to see Karasu for the first time in the anime a little later on, but he doesn't appear until after the battle in the manga. Because Botan isn't ringside in the manga, Kuwabara doesn't have his little monologue about Yusuke and Chu's match. In that same vein, the manga doesn't have the scene where Keiko gets up and runs off during the fight, leading to Shizuru meeting and subsequently being saved by Sakio. Another anime exclusive moment is when Keiko makes her way to the ring and Kuwabara explains to her the circumstances of their participation in the tournament. After defeating Chu in the anime, After defeating Chu in the anime, Chu tells Yusuke to finish him off since they agreed to a death match, but Yusuke refuses and shows him some grace. In the manga, Chu remains unconscious and Yusuke asks Rinku to pass along his words when Chu wakes up. When Toguro asks Karasu what he thinks of Yusuke because they'll be facing off against his team before long, in the anime Karasu says only if Yusuke's team continues winning, but in the manga he says Yusuke has made a fatal mistake and that he's exhausted his spirit gun. The line in the anime feels more throwaway, whereas the line in the manga cues up the mystery of the coming absence of Yusuke's spirit gun. The next episode of the anime begins with the segment where Yusuke is clearly struggling to channel his spirit gun before Kuwabara shows up, and there's also a brief shot of Hiei struggling to use his right arm before pivoting to the introduction of Team Ichigaki. The manga begins this next stretch by getting right to Ichigaki's match. The anime goes right from the match to Yusuke being set upon by Rugby, but the manga goes to the discussion between Botan and Keiko, where Keiko talks about how Yusuke looked happy while he was fighting. The encounter with Rugby also doesn't exist in the manga, and instead that scene begins with Yusuke telling Kuwabara about the absence of his spear gun. In the anime, the masked fighter, who I'm just going to call Genkai since we know it's her, brings up that his emotional state is linked to his power. The manga offers a more concrete explanation by saying that Yusuke's decision to use a rapid-fire spirit gun to counter Chu was an advanced technique that wasn't meant for someone with only 6 months of training. She goes on to say that he shouldn't use his spirit gun until he's fully recovered or he'll ruin his arm. It gives you much more of an understanding of the situation. When deciding the stipulations of the match, in the manga Toguro says he'd be fine with a 5v1 or series of one-on-ones, and leaves it up to the opposing team. In the anime, Toguro specifically requests they all fight him at once. Because the segment with Rugby doesn't exist in the manga, there's no back and forth between the leader of the Spirit Warriors and Toguro during their battle about who gets to kill Yusuke. Toguro just steamrolls the team. On the flip side, in the anime, Yusuke, Kuwabara, Genkai, and Botan are all present in the stadium to witness the battle, whereas in the manga, it's only Kurama that's stopped in to watch. At the beginning of the next chapter, we see precisely the circumstances that led M's 1 through 3 into the clutches of Ichigaki, and we're shown that Kuwabara just finds it to be a bit weird when he wakes up. He tells Yusuke about it, but Yusuke only says that Ichigaki sounds familiar. In the anime, Kuwabara's dream is treated closer to a nightmare, and when he goes to tell Yusuke about it, he gets completely shut down before he can describe his dream. When Yusuke, Kuwabara, and Genkai are confronted by Koenma on their way to Ichigaki's match, Koenma explains that Yusuke's spirit beast is about to hatch, but because the circumstances of the trial are different between versions, the refresh here reflects that. Koenma also realizes that Yusuke has only learned the most basic of basics when it comes to controlling his spirit energy, and assumes Yusuke only truly responds to combat experience. In the anime, it's made pretty clear in this exchange that Koenma knows who the masked fighter is, all but confirming it to be Genkai, which contradicts what he said to George earlier in the anime. It isn't until the two teams are facing one another that we see what Kuwabara's dream was in the anime. When Ichigaki proposes his wager, in the anime he only asks for Yusuke's body as a prize for his experiments, but to my surprise, in the manga, he asks for Yusuke and Kuwabara. A major difference between the anime and manga is that the manga pivots to the special chapter 2-shot in the middle of the Ichigaki fight, and while this did get an OVA back in like 2018 or 2019, it doesn't appear in the original run of the anime, so at the time, it was manga exclusive. The OVA is incredibly faithful to this side story, but since it wasn't part of the original run, I'm also not going to cover it here. 2-shots, though, covers the story of how Kurama and Hiei met each other. Students have been going missing lately, and it's clear from the opening it's due to something living in an abandoned building where we see 3 students get attacked. The students speculate over the cause of the disappearances, and Kurama suggests they ran away, but his classmate Maya wants to believe in something more exciting. From the reaction of another classmate, we're told Maya has a bit of a crush on Kurama. Later, Kurama is confronted by a demon he allowed to live, who lets it slip that he has an ally to help him get back at the fox and turn the town into a hunting ground. Unfortunately, Maya happened to see the creature Kurama was talking to, suggesting that his extended presence presence has enhanced her spiritual awareness. Maya confesses her love to Kurama and asks how he feels about her. Sadly, despite Kurama feeling the same way, he knows he can't tell her due to the potential danger of being involved with him. Immediately afterward, Hiei attacks the pair for unknown reasons, and in an attempt to protect Maya, Kurama leads Hiei away. However, this leaves her vulnerable to being abducted by the demon that had confronted Kurama earlier as a gift for a demon named 8 Hands. Eventually, Kurama and Hiei stop fighting once they realize there was a misunderstanding, and Hiei loses consciousness from a wound he sustained. When Hiei wakes up, Kurama comments that Hiei had mentioned Yukina in his sleep, and notes his Jagan was likely recent from the looks of it. Hiei eventually heads off to find 8 Hands, and Kurama receives a call indicating Maya hadn't made it home, causing Kurama to set out to team up with Hiei. When 8 Hands shows himself, Hiei asks about an ice maiden he was rumored to have eaten, and Kurama asks about Maya. The fight goes poorly until the two realize they need to be working together, at which point they effortlessly dispose of the demon who, as a reward, tells Hiei he'd never consumed an ice maiden and that Maya was safe. On the way home, Kurama uses the pollen of a dream flower to erase not just Maya's memories of the night, but her feelings for him too. Kurama finally introduces himself, and the chapter ends telling us that a year later is when Hiei and Kurama joined forces with Goki. Back to the main story, weirdly enough, Gatasaval has a mouth in the manga and I don't like it. In that same vein, when overcoming Gatasaval, Kurama links its circuits to his whip, which gives him control of it somehow. In the anime, Kurama just kills it outright. Botan goes ringside in the anime where Kubar explains to her the situation with M's 1 through 3 and his reluctance to really fight back. But in the manga, this doesn't happen since Genkai makes her way back to the ring pretty quickly after tanking an attack for Yusuke. Kubar's rally to get through to M's 1 through 3 goes on for much longer in the anime, and he takes more of a beating before being laid out. In the manga, the M's just close in for one go and remove him from the fight. When Yusuke is able to see the attacks coming at him, the claw attack from M3 is actually shaped like a claw in the manga, which I do find particularly funny. When Genkai steps in, the manga makes it clear that she does so because she knows Yusuke can beat their opponents with his newfound power, but isn't capable of saving them. She also notes that spirit energy is once again flowing through his right arm. At the conclusion of the match, when Ichigaki transforms, he spends time squabbling with Team Urameshi with his extendo grip arms, but in the manga, the moment he makes a move, Yusuke knocks him into the audience with a single blow. He doesn't take the time to hit Ichigaki for each person he wronged. When the tournament committee forces Hiei and Genkai into the medical tent, Ruka takes a special interest in Hiei's arm in the anime but doesn't focus on it at all in the manga. The anime takes the time to show us this ruling is specifically the work of the owner of Team Masho, but the manga just allows the sudden hurdle to linger on its own. Small difference, but when Gama uses the makeup of chains on Kurama, the manga says the complete outfit is like having 617 pounds chained to him at about 154 pounds per limb. The anime says the complete outfit anchors about 2,000 pounds directly to his skin at about 250 pounds per limb. In terms of weight, that is a massive difference overall, but has no immediate effect on the story at large. After Gama's defeated, in the anime he says that his seal on Kurama's energy will linger on, but we get a much more specific time in the manga when he says it'll remain for 10 minutes after his death. The match between Kurama and Toya is mostly the same except for one thing. In the anime, after Toya brings out his ice sword and a lot of dodging from the fox, Kurama purposely allows himself to be wounded so that he can plant a death seed in his arm, which allows him to clutch the victory. In the manga, Toya brings out the ice sword because he realizes the 10 minutes is almost up and he needs to take Kurama out. It's literally his final attack, and he's countered by Kurama, who planted the seed of the death plant into one of the wounds caused by Toya's ranged assault earlier. Kurama's small speech in the anime at the end of the match with Toya is completely absent from the manga. The anime has the tournament committee give its own wobbly reasoning for keeping Kurama in the ring against Bakken, but the manga's committee doesn't bother with an explanation when it overrules Kodo. After Kurama is removed from the ring, in the anime Genkai comments that Ruka's force field won't be able to hold Shi and Hiei for much longer. In the manga, Genkai doesn't say anything to Ruka, nor is it hinted in this moment that Ruka's slowly losing her grip on the pair. The Bakken fight is much shorter in the manga, like way shorter. Bakken hits Yusuke just one time before he dispels the shinobi's fog. In the anime, he fires a spirit gun out of the ring to cause an explosion with the stadium wall that blows the fog away, which I always found to be weird considering how close Bakken was to him. In the manga, he aims the spirit gun at his feet, using the explosion to immediately force the air to clear, which just makes more sense to me in the moment. The anime gives a clearer explanation for why Hiei's arm is healing within Ruka's force field, whereas the manga just says he's on the mend. When the moment arrives, Jin spends a lot of time in the anime flying around the arena before actually initiating combat. In the manga, he goes into strike right after coming down out of the air. The anime includes more moments of Butajiri bragging about his meddling with the round that are absent from the manga. In the manga though, Hiei is the one that clues the audience in that Yusuke has one final path to victory despite the risks. In the anime, Genkai is the one that voices it. The battle from here proceeds and concludes relatively the same between both versions. When Butajiri is using the tournament committee to have Yusuke's victory turned into a double loss, in the manga we actually get to see the woman on the committee who makes the announcements. It's interesting to put a face to the voice. The moment from the anime where Toguro is annoyed by Butajiri's scheming is absent from the manga, unfortunately. Risho doesn't smack Toya out of the ring in the manga the way he does in the anime when confronted about their cheated victory. The anime has a small scene where Shizuru and Keiko run into Yukina outside of the stadium before Kuwabara throws his hat into the ring against Risho. The manga gets right to him showing up to prevent his team from being disqualified. In fact, the ladies don't even show up to the arena at all during this round of the tournament until Kuwabara is in the ring. That's when they all run into Yukina together. Right before the two jump into action, the manga goes ahead and has Toguro kill Butajiri, while this comes a bit later in the anime. In the anime, Yukina reveals that she's searching for her brother in the very first scene where she links up with the ladies. In the manga, she doesn't reveal this bit of information until they're already making their way back to watch Kuwabara's match. Yukina and Toguro don't come face to face in the manga the way they do in the anime while the ladies are rushing to the arena. The entire side plot with Sakyo and Shizuru also just doesn't exist in the manga, to which thank fuck for that. It isn't until after Kuwabara has taken a bit of an ass whooping that the anime returns to the Butajiri situation. Unlike the manga, Sakyo admits that he was responsible for Terukane's death instead of going on about the sloppiness of Butajiri's plans. The battle against Risho is much shorter in the manga of course, but otherwise proceeds with the same story beats as the anime. Although Risho gets backhanded before his final attack can even connect with Kuwabara in the manga, and Kuwabara doesn't use his spirit sword to hurl the man out into the crowd. The explanation about what happens to Yusuke's soul if he's devoured by his spirit beast only happens in the anime. The manga wastes no time with the hatching of the egg. In the anime, the semifinals start the day after tomorrow relative to the current scene of Yusuke's awakened spirit beast, and Botan tells them they intend to check out the competition early the next morning. But in the manga, Kuwabara simply says the semifinals start soon, which we find out later from Hiei means tomorrow, and they head out right away to check out who they'll be up against. We find out here in the manga that Kurama only knows about Yukina because Yusuke told him, but this is knowledge that Kurama already has via his own sleuthing in the anime. After being confronted by Toguro in the stadium, Kuwabara's response in the anime is much more indicative of the fear that comes with being able to fully sense the enemy's power. It's more focused on the gap that still exists between the teams in terms of power. His manga counterpart just kind of mutters in disbelief that they actually squared off with him back at Terukane's compound. It says the same thing in its own way, but doesn't build a sense of dread the way the anime does. Yusuke's response to Kuwabara's floundering is also much more encouraging in the manga, and Genkai doesn't call him out for his tough guy act. Team Yuri Itogi walks up on Team Urameshi right after Kuwabara's small panic attack in the manga, but they wait until Team Urameshi is in a side room before they approach in the anime. The conversation in both versions is roughly the same though. Interestingly, the circumstances under which Genkai and Yusuke break off from the group are very different. The anime uses the pretext of an argument to separate them from the rest of the team, but in the manga, Genkai just asks if she can speak to Yusuke in private without any added drama. After the demonstration Genkai gives that explains why she looked younger in the tournament, the manga iteration talks about how she doubts she could summon such a ridiculous spirit gun again, saying to herself that doing so could cost her her life. The lead up to Yusuke's final test is mostly the same across both versions, with some light differences in dialogue. The biggest difference comes when Genkai is explaining what a spirit orb is, not necessarily referring to it as the spirit wave orb. In the manga, this seems like it's less unique of an object than the anime makes it out to be. Genkai goes on to equate it to a tiny sun, while also warning not just that the process will be painful, but that he could suffer permanent injuries in the event he does survive the trial. It makes the ordeal feel a bit more menacing. When facing off against Makintaro, after Hiei takes his arm, Makintaro turns his remaining arm into the Axe Fist in the manga, but in the anime he regenerates the lost limb into the Axe Fist. Genkai doesn't try to remove the spirit orb from Yusuke in the manga, she simply remarks that in order to survive the tournament, he has to survive his trial and that it's all or nothing at this point. When Kuro Momotaro squares off against Hiei, in the anime he slices his arm to grant himself immunity to Hiei's blade. In the manga, he cuts off the fingers on his left hand for some reason, which remain gone for the remainder of the battle. The anime pads out the runtime with cuts to the ladies as well as Yusuke's continued trial. The moment where Kurama mentions having never seen Hiei back away from an opponent is also exclusive to the manga, which adds some gravity to the severity of the threat posed. The manga goes right from Kuro transforming, to Hiei deciding to use his last-ditch effort, to being attacked immediately. It's not a drawn-out exchange by any means. The stories Yuri Urishima tells Kurama in the anime versus the manga are vastly different from one another, with the anime saying he was roped into wrongdoing in order to provide for his grandmother, and the manga saying he's an evil spirit that has returned due to lingering resentment from circumstances you can read on screen. In the manga, Yuri Urishima calls out Kurama for his name, mentioning he knew another Kurama that was very much his opposite. During the flashback with Hiei, Goki, and Kurama, the argument is settled in the manga by Kurama's invitation for Goki to jump if he's feeling froggy. The anime takes it one step further by having Kurama give a demonstration of what he's capable of, getting Goki to back down. The fight against Yuri Urishima proceeds as you'd expect, with some additional dialogue from Kurama explaining how dangerous his plant is. The anime cuts from the conclusion of this fight to the ladies, where Keiko's carrying Pooh before he freaks out and flies off to find Yusuke, and then to Genkai, who laments the choice she made giving Yusuke his trial. Then we go right back to the semi-final round with Team Urameshi. The manga goes from the conclusion of the previous fight right to Pooh giving Yusuke water in the cave. A difference within this moment is that Pooh is carrying the water in his mouth in the manga, but in the anime he's using his ears/wing things to carefully carry water to Yusuke. Yusuke also doesn't save Pooh from falling rocks in the cave, he's simply motivated by Pooh's desire to persist despite feeling the same pain as Yusuke. The anime counterpart to the scene definitely holds more emotional resonance. The ladies in the anime are still on their way to the old arena, while the ladies in the manga are already there and trying to figure out why no one is around. The anime then has to play catch up and finally wrap up Yusuke's ordeal. The fight between Kuwabara and Shishi Wakamaru is drawn out much more in the anime, with Kuwabara's every move being read and dodged before he's engulfed by the Cape of No Return. In the manga, Kuwabara's performance is even worse because he's ejected from the stadium as soon as the battle begins and he closes in for his first attack. When Genkai's identity is called into question, the manga gives us another peek at who's behind the microphone speaking on behalf of the committee. Toguro also makes his case in defense of Genkai from within the announcement booth and not next to Koto's desk the way he does in the anime. When Kuwabara returns to watch the match in the manga, Shishi has already raised the Cage of Hell, while in the anime he shows up before the wall goes up and gets to experience the same noise that filled the stadium earlier. The battle goes on for longer in the anime, with Shishi going for a second wave of the Chorus of a Thousand Skulls, which Genkai absorbs, and a second Spirit Reflection Blast finally ends the battle. When Chu and the others stumble across Keiko and Yusuke, it's Chu that realizes Yusuke's gotten stronger in the anime. In the manga, Jin is the one that takes notice, which is a strange switch since it makes more sense for Jin to notice given he was the stronger opponent. In the fight with Onji, we don't actually see Kuwabara get trapped in the sphere when it comes to the manga. After the moment with Jin and the others, when we cut back, he's already trapped. The anime actually gives the audience a fight to watch, however brief, before Kuwabara is ultimately defeated. When rolling the dice to determine his next opponent, Onji comments that because he knows all the secrets of the Eidon box, Kurama would have to fight him in his human form if his name came up, but his manga counterpart simply ponders the idea of telling Kurama the secrets of the box in the event Kurama defeats him should they end up battling. Everyone's favorite cringe clown is called Suzuka in the anime and Suzuki in the manga. We get another allusion to the fact the manga version of Genkai didn't create the spirit orb she gave Yusuke, but that she inherited it when she mentioned needing to be physically fit to endure the act of receiving it. I kind of wish this was still the case in the anime to create a true line of succession. The remainder of the fight lines up between the two versions, but who decided to give Genkai a sassy victory pose? Was Togashi just down bad when he drew this? When Kuwabara comments on the fact Yusuke is still sleeping in the manga, it's not just him in the room. He's hanging out with Chu and the others, and before Genkai departs, she tells him not to lose. In the anime, she says he has a gentle heart and that he should use it. We don't see the battle between Karasu and Midoriya in the manga the way we do in the anime. Instead, all we get is the aftermath of Karasu's assault, followed by the finisher. The anime shows us that Genkai instructed Kurama and Hiei to watch Team Togoro's match, but Hiei disobeys and goes off to train on his own. The anime also adds a scene of Genkai lost in thought, reflecting on happier times with Togoro, before being met by the ladies of Team Urameshi, where Shizuru notices something is off. The manga goes through the totality of Team Togoro's fight, and then goes into Kurama being confronted in the stadium hallway by Karasu and Bui. When the anime wraps up the fight with Team Gorenjia, there's a small added scene of Karasu and Bui having been beaten down by the Togoros, as the elder is explaining why the two work for the Togoros despite being so powerful. Before the confrontation between Genkai and Togoro truly kicks off, and before Yusuke wakes up, The manga has a small flashback where Toguro expresses his disdain at the idea of growing old. A similar scene occurs in the anime, but a bit later on after Yusuke is already on his way to their location, alongside an extra scene of Kuwabara who's with the ladies instead of with Chu and the others. When Genkai is explaining to Yusuke how she got roped into the tournament, it's the demon triad that comes to visit her in the manga, and you can see they're still kind of busted up from their face-off with Yusuke and Kuwabara. In the anime, it's just a pair of nondescript demons. Genkai's final words to Yusuke before her death are much less vague in the manga, which I actually appreciate more. The anime spends time with Yusuke reflecting on his memories with Genkai and punching through a tree. The manga concludes this section right after Toguro shows his glee at the potential use of 100% of his power and Yusuke vowing to avenge Genkai. This volume of the manga opens with Suzuka leaving the infirmary despite being told not to because there's someone he needs to speak to. We know it's to link up with Kurama and Kuwabara, but this tiny scene is missing from the anime. The anime opens with Yusuke outside the cave where he took his trial, reminiscing about Genkai with Botan and Koenma reflecting on the situation too. The manga goes straight from the scene with Suzuka to the scene of Hiei and Kurama training. When handing over the items to Kurama and Kuwabara, in the manga he says the fruit he gave Kurama is from a newly discovered plant in the demon plane, while in the anime he says it's picked from the upper realms of the spirit world. Kuwabara also doesn't freak out at the Sword of Trials description and throw it back at Suzuka in the manga. When discussing why he's helping them, Suzuka mentions in the manga that he once went by the name Tanaka the Powerful Warrior, which is a great lightning-quick joke about his ego. But when actually discussing his interaction with Toguro, both versions are quite different. In the manga, Suzuka says that just seeing 30% of his power was enough to cause him to completely lose his cool and beg for mercy, and Toguro's response was that it was no fun killing someone so pathetic, saying Suzuka was less than a piece of lint to him. In the anime, Suzuka says it only took 3% of Toguro's power to make a fool of him, implying there was an actual fight. When he begged for his life, Toguro told him that he only kills true fighters and job assignments. Suzuka was neither, so he was told to run along. I think the anime does a better job of conveying not just the insane power gap, but the dismissive disrespect. It's only after this scene that the manga finally transitions to Yusuke in front of the cave for the first time. However, these two scenes play out quite different. In the manga, after Koenma makes it clear that Yusuke wouldn't have been able to change Genkai's fate, he goes on to pass along some final words from her to Yusuke, basically telling him to win against Toguro. This is enough to snap Yusuke out of his funk, and it pivots into the iconic scene of him firing his spirit gun into the sky in her honor. The anime drags this out over the duration of the episode, so Yusuke is inconsolable for a while, and it frames this as Genkai's true final test, Yusuke overcoming the initial grief of his mentor's passing. When Sakyo reveals his plans, there are a few key differences in the overall conversation. The main ones being that in the manga, Sakyo doesn't admit to the murders of Butojiri and Terukune, and he doesn't make it known that the way he was able to run up the betting odds was through his choice in guest team, being Yusuke's, since otherwise no one would bet against Team Toguro. When Kuwabara goes to show off the latest iteration of the Spirit Sword and the others show up, the entirety of this scene takes place in their hotel room in the manga, while in the anime it's out near the cliffside. When Kurama asks Yusuke about Genkai's replacement, Kuwabara in the manga mentions having heard she handed her powers over to Yusuke, but just assumes she tapped herself out during the semifinals. His anime counterpart makes no mention of this and is also clearly irritated that Genkai isn't there to participate. The anime has a scene where the ladies finesse the scalper from earlier out of the tickets they need to get into the finals. This is referenced in the manga but not shown. After Team Urameshi is called out for switching in Koenma, Karasu in the manga mentions that Koenma is devoid of any spirit energy and is likely just there to prevent the team from being disqualified, to which Koenma acknowledges. The anime version of this same exchange sees Karasu saying it won't be necessary for Koenma to fight anyway since Team Urameshi won't make it to the 5th match, to which Koenma antagonizes Karasu. The conversation between Botan and Shizuru is extended a bit in the anime, but really shows just how torn up Botan has been regarding Genkai's death. Karasu's opening statements to Kurama are different between versions, with the manga having him ask if Kurama truly wants to face Karasu as he is, implying that he expected Yoko to step into the ring. In the anime, he simply says that no one that's seen his ability in action has dared to face him, so Kurama is either extremely brave or extremely foolish. By this point, I don't think I need to tell you guys that the fights are extended for the sake of the anime. In the anime, there's a back and forth where Kurama even attempts to use his Rose Whip only to have Karasu destroy it. Karasu is way more talkative and goes for a flurry of slashing attacks before he finally connects with his first bomb to Kurama's arm. In the manga, Karasu catches Kurama's arm with the first bomb right after destroying the whirlwind of rose petals. Karasu goes on to nail Kurama with a second bomb in the anime, which doesn't happen in its print counterpart. With the exception of small side conversations from the peanut gallery, the fight proceeds roughly the same across both versions. Though when Karasu has Kurama trapped by bombs, he only hits him with a couple in the manga before Kurama's internal explanation of his plan. In the anime, he kinda wrecks my boy with bombs before that same internal monologue begins. The level of violence on display is cranked up in the anime and Kurama is left blood-soaked. After Kurama goes down, there's a panel where Koda mentions that the cheering is so loud she can barely hear herself think, but she's sure Juri is doing her 10 count. We're never actually shown the count though. In the anime, Kodo calls for Juri to begin counting and she makes it all the way to 8 with Kurama still on the ground before we switch to more internal dialogue from Kurama. Her counting is stopped, which is done to bait the audience into thinking Kurama got up in time. After Kurama's loss, Yusuke and Juri get into a small altercation about the results of the match in the anime. The instant replay with the timer is also shown to emphasize just how close Kurama came to winning. The manga just has Juri explain the situation and Kodo confirms via the replay without showing it. It's very concise and to the point. When Hiei makes it known that his wish in the event of their victory would be the death of the tournament committee, Sakio doesn't say a word in response in the manga, whereas in the anime, he gets a kick out of the fact that Hiei's wish had already technically been granted. In the anime, the elder Toguro steps into the ring ready to get the massacre going, only to have Bui come forward to fight instead. In the manga, Bui gets into the ring unprompted and the elder Toguro just stays on his younger brother's shoulder. Koenma poking fun at Kuwabara for wanting to take on Bui is anime exclusive and one of my favorite interactions between them. In the early stages of the fight between Hiei and Bui in the manga, the member of Team Toguro only throws one of the arena blocks at Hiei, using it as a blinder to close the distance between them. The anime has Hiei dodge a flurry of thrown blocks and utilize the Fist of the Mortal Flame to punch through others, where Bui finally closes the distance. However, while Hiei uses the Fist of the Mortal Flame to block Bui's axe in the anime, his manga counterpart never uses the technique here and simply halts and melts his foe's blade with his bare hand. Although Hiei destroys the axe right away after stopping it, in the anime his punch breaks the axe, which causes Bui to summon a second. It's only when he throws this one that Hiei incinerates it. Once the armor comes off, Bui is the one that reveals his energy by saying, "I call this battle aura." But in the manga, it's Kurama that identifies it as such and alludes to the idea that it's not unique to Bui. In the manga, after the battle aura is revealed, Hiei takes off his bandages to unveil the dragon on his arm. The anime, as to be expected, sees the two going back and forth trading attacks for a bit. It's not until Hiei fails to put Bui down by tricking him into being hit by his own attack that he decides to unveil his ace. The anime adds a lot to the lead up of the unleashing of the darkness flame, but the manga just dives right into it. The anime also includes flashbacks to how Bui ended up under the thumb of the Toguro brothers, while the manga sticks to the action in the present moment. Hiei's return to the arena is much quicker in the manga too. Basically, the moment Bui and the audience start celebrating, he shows back up. There's a much wider gap between his perceived defeat and subsequent return in the anime. As is the case, the anime really extends the final stretch of this fight by having Bui toss out a bunch of wombo combos and even a throw before being put in his place by Hiei. The manga concludes this fight right away. After Bui punches Hiei one time, Hiei retaliates with a launch before knocking him into the stands, where the match wraps up relatively the same across both versions, although the anime includes more flashbacks to Bui's history. The anime lingers for a little bit during the intermission between matches to focus on Kuwabara's growing fear at the prospect of facing the elder Toguro, who himself confronts Kuwabara in front of everyone. It also takes the time to show he still doesn't understand why Genkai is absent. The manga skips to the end of the 6-hour intermission where Hiei is just waking back up. Because of this difference in where time is spent, the anime shows Team Urameshi's reaction to Toguro carrying it in the ring from the previous stadium, but the manga just has a single panel shot of it as Kurama explains to Hiei why the finals hadn't continued after his showdown. The anime does a good job of sprinkling in hints in-universe for Kuwabara about Genkai's death based on what the people around him are saying. The manga doesn't really do this to the same degree. The battle honestly proceeds damn near one-to-one between versions for a while, with the exception of dialogue. After Kuwabara slices up the elder Toguro, the manga gives us an explanation as to how exactly he pulled that off, with ET saying Kuwabara's sword was giving off energy similar to shuriken. Juri doesn't even get a chance to count the way she does in the anime, since ET just pulls himself back together right away. When Kuwabara catches ET off guard with the attack from behind, the anime doesn't explain how he pulls this off, but the manga has the elder Toguro assume it's some sort of telekinesis. At the time in which Kuwabara is gearing up to deal the decisive blow to the elder Toguro brother, in the anime he seems to consciously change the shape of the sword to fit his need in the moment, but in the manga he notes how the sword reacts to his needs and takes the most effective shape. While things do proceed along the same lines across both versions after the match, Yusuke's speech when confronted about Genkai's death is a bit different. The sentiment is the same, but most notably in the anime, Yusuke concludes his piece by saying he can't apologize for dealing with her death the only way he knew how. But in the manga, Yusuke does actually apologize for keeping Kuwabara in the dark after explaining why he chose to keep silent. I genuinely prefer the approach the manga takes here. After Koenma accepts Sakio's wager in the manga, he mentions that it's clear Sakio has wagered his life many times before, and that ambition like his could lead to devastating outcomes before telling Yusuke he's the only one that can stop Sakio. The anime forgoes this in favor of Koenma saying he wouldn't be able to beat Sakio in hand-to-hand combat. During the intermission between matches, the conversation between Sakio and Toguro about the gambler's history takes place near the arena in the manga. In the anime, they leave the area to chatter and Shizuru is eavesdropping. One detail that changes in the story story is that the manga version of Sakio mentions that after less than 3 years of essentially torturing and dissecting animals, he moved on to humans. During the first phase of the championship battle, Toguro halts one of his punches. In the manga, he says he almost did something unfair, and we're shown that the ladies of Team Urameshi are directly behind Yusuke up in the stands, so we can infer that Toguro realized the attacks he was unleashing would have unfairly dragged Yusuke's loved ones into the battle. In the anime, he stops to address the look on Yusuke's face, which he deems as judgment, before levying a thinly veiled threat in Keiko's direction, saying Yusuke has no idea what it feels like to lose his beloved. Hiei comments in the anime that Yusuke allowed emotions to enter the battle with him, but in the manga he notes that the fighters are feeling each other out. So one key difference in the vibe of the fight is that in the anime, Toguro is much more outwardly antagonistic, whereas in the manga, he seems to honestly want Yusuke to perform in the way he knows the boy is capable of. Like when Toguro destroys the arena. In the anime he says he just wants to kick it up a notch, and while the debris is in the air, he taunts Yusuke to come out. But in the manga, when he destroys the arena, he actively warns Yusuke he's about to put more power behind his next strike. Once what's left of the ring is scattered in the air, Toguro admits that he purposely created that smoke screen of debris, likely to give Yusuke a way to demonstrate his capabilities. The anime takes some time getting to Yusuke removing the spirit cuffs given to him by Genkai, with everyone of note, Yusuke included, being taken aback by the lack of any real damage done by his enhanced spirit gun. Toguro even flexes his energy, putting Yusuke on the back foot. The manga, however, doesn't linger on this at all. As soon as Toguro returns and says his piece, Yusuke goes right on to remove his cuffs. In that same scene, when Yusuke removes the cuffs in the anime, his spirit energy takes on the form of what becomes of Pooh in Chapter Black. This doesn't occur in the manga, and I'm sure it's because Chapter Black hadn't even been conceptualized yet, but it's neat foreshadowing for the anime. Toguro is very clearly irritated by Yusuke fighting with a handicap in the anime, but he's far cooler about it in the manga, which just highlights how tone and word choice can really change the flavor of a character's attitude. In the anime, Toguro blocks and dispels a blast from Yusuke's spirit gun with the muscles of his chest. However, and more impressively, his manga counterpart dispels Yusuke's blast with a shout, essentially blowing it out like a candle. After launching Yusuke into the audience, the anime version of Toguro says Yusuke isn't doing his job and really focuses on the idea that Yusuke has untapped potential. In the manga, he says that Yusuke has only earned the right to fight him at 100% and that this moment is about him, not Yusuke. He goes on to say that Yusuke has an obligation to fight with everything he's got, but questions whether or not Yusuke has been doing so. The manga version is less sure if Yusuke has untapped potential and simply wants to make sure he's drawn everything out of Yusuke. When Yusuke cracks Toguro on the noggin, the anime version of our villain notes that it's Yusuke's refusal to admit the pair are so similar that caused him to lash out with more power. However, the manga just chalks this moment up to sheer rage and doesn't read any deeper. Thankfully, Keiko's little breakdown doesn't really exist in the manga. These 4 panels are basically the extent of it. The anime has a series of flashbacks with Yusuke and Keiko before Toguro's influence seeps through. Chu and Rinku come to Koto's rescue in the anime, but not in the manga. The lead up to Yusuke unleashing his true strength goes approximately the same across both versions, just with extended dialogue in the anime. Though we don't get Kuwabara's "Mulberry is a tree" line in the manga, which kinda surprised me considering how iconic that line became. Yusuke's response to Kuwabara's perceived death diverges a bit in the dialogue. The manga has Yusuke focus on the fact that he was unable to save Kuwabara, while the anime has him focus on the fact he wanted to tap into his power but didn't know how to reach it. I'm partial to the anime version, but they're both solid for their respective moments. While Yusuke in the manga alludes to the things Genkai told him about to prevent him from going down the same route as Toguro, the anime singles out the discussion she had with Yusuke right before her death. Toguro doesn't actually say he was only using 85% of his power in the manga when he finally goes to max. He just says that now he's at 100% of 100%. In the manga, Yusuke notes that he has to pour everything he has into this last attack, but when he gathers all of his spirit energy, he deems it insufficient and proceeds to tap into his life energy to make the blast even more powerful. The anime makes no mention of Yusuke drawing on life energy here. Before he kicks the bucket, the manga version of Toguro mentions that Yusuke easily hit 120% of his power output, and that fighting for the sake of others is a great source of power. This is omitted from the anime adaptation entirely. The anime puts more emphasis on the reasons why Toguro wanted to be defeated by Yusuke, and the conversation goes on for a bit with Sakio joining in before he ultimately sets in motion his contingency plan to destroy the stadium. Naturally, the entire sequence with Sakio and Shizuru is absent from the manga. It's still one of the strangest plot threads that just doesn't really fit in with the story anyway. When fleeing the stadium, Keiko carries Yusuke on her back in the manga after knocking him smooth the fuck out with a slap. In the anime, he's being helped along by Kurama in the escape. The manga just sees our crew make it out of the stadium with ease, while in the anime, they find their escape route blocked by debris and end up being rescued by Chu and the others. Since Atsuko isn't present in the anime, it's Botan that brings up the lingering issue of the tournament prizes. During the explanation of Togoro's past, in the anime we're told that Kairen showed up to slay Togoro's students while he was away to make him fearful of the demon prior to the tournament as a sort of invitation. However, the manga tells us that Kairen showed up at Togoro's dojo to explicitly invite him as a guest to the tournament before promptly slaying the students there. The anime gives us a brief flashback to the aftermath of Genkai's death where Toguro hints to Koenma that Yusuke's victory wish will be her revival. The manga, after this point, wastes no time with the Genkai reveal, whereas the anime takes more time to build to it. Either way, Genkai's return marks the official end of the Dark Tournament story arc, and holy cannoli, what a beefy journey that was. This somehow took way more and way less time than I initially assumed it would. The crisp pace of the manga actually made sitting through the anime the rough part, since that required much more active engagement. It was easy enough to read through small chunks of the manga in tandem with where I was in the anime, but the anime adds so much extra content that it very much slowed the pace of the project. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the anime, we all know that, but this was the first time I was really feeling the length of the Dark Tournament. Both iterations of the Dark Tournament have things they do better or worse than their respective counterpart. I think the pacing of the manga is far superior and keeps the momentum going a bit better. The anime does a far better job at establishing and maintaining the tone, and the dialogue hits way harder in certain moments. There's merit to experiencing the Dark Tournament both ways, and I very much enjoyed myself. With that huge chunk of the story out of the way, I'm eager to move on to Chapter Black and see how the two versions compare, especially now that Chapter Black is my favorite story arc in the show. Once again, a huge shout out to these wonderful people for their continued support over on Patreon, with a special shout out to Celestial Tier backers Angus Clydesdale, Super Sunset, This One Sneck, Totally Reasonable Curb, and Trey Hardy. If you'd like to see videos early, see your name in, or select a portrait for the credit scroll, consider heading to the link in the description and pinned comment to show some support. Remember to take care of yourselves and others. I'll see you guys again as soon as I can, and as always, thanks for watching.